It would be known as the worst mass murder involving one family in the history of the United States. Even after 3 decades, the very mention of Ronald Gene Simmons' name still evokes terror in the hearts of those who lived through his killing spree. It is known as Christmas Rampage. He was and is the boogeyman in children's nightmares. His family was the epitome of everything social service workers and school counselors thought they were trained to spot. And his reclusive and bizarre lifestyle was something you could assume would have drawn the scrutiny and concern of other people in the area. But it just didn't, unfortunately. To truly understand the magnitude of the horror that took place in this small, tight-knit community in Arkansas, it's important to consider the size and scope of the town itself. With a population of just 1,329 people, 529 households, and 372 families, this town was minuscule in size. A small town typically is a place where everyone knew each other and where it was said that everyone knows your business. But as it turned out over Christmas, that wasn't the case. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15, 1940. He was a trouble man from the start. Born in the bustling city of Chicago, Illinois, he had a tumultuous childhood that was marked by loss and instability. His father passed away when he was just 3 years old from a stroke, leaving him to be raised by his mother and her second husband, a civil engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Despite the guidance and support of his stepfather, Simmons struggled with mental health issues and a deep-seated anger that would eventually lead him down a very dark and twisted path. At 17 years old, Simmons dropped out of school and joined the U.S. Navy. His first station was Bremerton Naval Base in Washington, where he met Becky Ulibarri, whom he married in New Mexico on July 9, 1960. In 1963, Simmons left the Navy, and approximately 2 years later, he joined the Air Force. During his 22-year military career, Simmons was awarded a Bronze Star, the Republic of Vietnam Cross for his service as an airman, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. Simmons retired in 1979 at the rank of Master Sergeant. Over those 18 years, the couple had 7 children: Jean, Loretta, Eddie, Marianne, Becky, Barbara, and Billy. Simmons was a strict and controlling father, often physically and emotionally abusive towards his children and wife. Despite this, the family seemed to function normally, at least from the observation of outsiders, although relatives grew increasingly concerned as the years moved on. The children were never allowed to attend any school functions, and the limited amount of friends they were allowed to have, or not known to have, were never allowed to spend a night at the Simmons home, nor were the Simmons children ever allowed to stay over at a friend's home. Yet this odd peculiarity went unnoticed to others, although some of their friends later made comments that should have raised big concerns. There were no records of disciplinary actions for the children, and their attendance had been near perfect. When teachers were questioned about the children in their class, most commented that they really didn't know the children well. It seems incredible that these children could have attended such a small school for as long and managed to remain relatively unnoticed and unknown. The Simmons family didn't always live in Arkansas. They actually lived in New Mexico prior. They fled to Arkansas, and for a very disturbing, dark reason. Now, back in 1981, Stephen K. Sanders of the Alamogordo, New Mexico, he was the district attorney in the city at the time, and he said the Simmons family lived nearby. He went on to state that Simmons's guilt of the charge was indisputable. He further went on to say that authorities learned of it from two sources. First, from Simmons Jr., who informed local social service agencies, and from friends of the daughter at Cloudcroft High School who were told by the Simmons' daughter. Now, the daughter, Simmons' daughter at the time, was Sheila Simmons, and she was obviously pregnant when it came to the authorities' attention. Now, later she married and her last name changed to Sheila McNutley. Now, Stephen K. Sanders, the district attorney, went on to state they had a lot of trouble prosecuting the case because the daughter refused to testify against her father before the grand jury. He went on to state that they actually had to threaten her with a contempt of court citation. Eventually, she did testify, and Simmons was actually indicted. Now, the indictment was returned against Simmons in 1981, August. But when the deputies went to serve the arrest warrant, the entire family was gone. Now, it was only learned later that they had moved to Russellville, and Simmons' name was filed with the National FBI computer. But Simmons stayed out of trouble and never surfaced with law enforcement agencies during the year his name remained on the computer. And yes, I know what we're all thinking, how tragic. But the laws and the way things worked then are not the way they are today. Regardless, this case, what happened, it's simply tragic. Almost a year later, they surfaced in Dover, Arkansas, some 15 miles out of town in a remote and densely wooded area at the end of a rutted red clay drive and barricaded like a fortress with cinder blocks and barbed wire. For Simmons and his family, this was his kingdom, and he was the king. Simmons called his castle of squalor Mockingbird Hill. He was nicknamed the Hillbilly from Hell. Simmons and his family lived in a state of isolation. I should say Simmons put his family in a state of isolation as control, hidden away from the rest of the world in their rundown and decrepit house. It was made from 2 mobile homes, single wides, put together. The windows were covered with thick, dusty curtains, blocking out any natural light or view of the outside world. The yard was overgrown with weeds and debris, a clear sign that no one cared for the property. It was a place of despair and hopelessness, a prison for the family that was trapped within its walls. The driveway was dotted with several large no trespassing signs. The road leading to the home was badly rutted red clay, at times impossible to enter when wet or slick from the snow and ice. The yard area, or area which the Simmons children kept mowed, was covered in piles of junk Simmons claimed to be building materials. There were several junk automobiles up on blocks in various stages of demolition scattered around the entire home. The Simmons home had no telephone. They never received mail, nor sent mail from their rural box by the side of their driveway. He was someone most people feared. He had a beer in his hand all the time. Simmons' life began to rapidly change. He was a troubled individual with a long history of questionable behavior. He held a series of low-paying jobs in the town of Russellville, each one ending in controversy. He worked as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight, but was eventually fired due to numerous reports of sexual harassment. He then took a job at Sinclair Mini Mart, where he worked for about a year and a half before quitting abruptly on December 18th, 1987. Despite his questionable past, Simmons managed to fly under the radar for years, avoiding detection and prosecution for his crime, even though they dropped it because the family just disappeared. But on December 22nd, 1987, everything changed.